Hi. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge all our collaborators whose contributions I'm including in this presentation: landscape architects Akshay Kaul and Aditya Advani, structural engineer B.L. Manjunath, sustainability consultants Gaurav Shori and EDS, contractors Buildcraft India, furniture designers Mangrove Collective and Ayush Kasliwal, all the Lotus team members, past and present, and of course, our clients, without whom none of this would exist. Whatever I'm sharing on behalf of all the people above. As we turn 21 years this year as a studio, we are still a work in progress, forming, cracking, reshaping, reforming. We are a team of about 110 people working as teams across various typologies and different scales. We are grateful for all the diverse work that flows in, be it small projects such as the Café Lota in the National Crafts Museum in Delhi, or a recently finished interior for Ekaya Saris, recently finished in Ahmedabad, to the Life Yoga studio that has just opened in Malchamag, a small home such as the Stacked House on a 200 square meter plot in New Delhi for a joint family of 6, or slightly larger homes like this one on the site of an acre in Mauritius. We do work for developers too, like the Imagine Studio and the clubhouse building we have done for Godrej Realty at the flagship Trees project in Vikhroli, Mumbai, or then the Max House a couple of kilometers from here, opposite Modi Mills in Okhla. This is a competition we won with the Aga Khan Trust at the Qutub Shahi Gardens in Hyderabad and is currently under construction. Hotels, like this recently finished project in Sikkim for the Taj Group, or then this university in Orissa for the state government that's being built as we speak. More ongoing projects such as a boarding school in Dehradun, or the School of Leadership for the Piramal Group, and so on. And while the practice and the team shapes itself around what we end up with on our plate, and we are mostly grateful for what we get, at a deeper level, I think what anchors us is our work together and the values that inform our projects, and I want to speak a little bit more about that today. So what are these values? What are some of the questions we've been asking of ourselves as we go about our work every day? Frugality being first and foremost, the approach towards keeping things passive and low-tech versus going for high-tech solutions, making innovation and sustainability accessible to a larger spectrum of projects. Reuse, looking at structures beyond the romance of history and seeing whether we can adapt even ordinary structures for the embodied carbon. Timelessness, not just in terms of durability, but in terms of how they stand the test of time, emotionally, and the love of people who use them, and not driven by what's trending, which is often passing fad. Redefining luxury, because a lot of our clients are HNIs and luxury brands, recognizing that we have a chance to influence aspirations for the mainstream, and redefining aspirations to include approaches that are regional and contextual, and digging into the huge repository of craft that our country offers for creating differentiation using indigenous techniques, looking inwards rather than westwards or eastwards. Sustainability is integral to everything we do, and we continue to engage with questions on how we can tread lightly on the planet, physically and metaphorically. I'm going to take you through a few examples that illustrate how we've attempted to address some of these questions and our learnings over the years. One of our very early projects 18 years ago, in 2006, was a store for Rajesh Pratap Singh at the Emporio Mall in Delhi, a designer who's known for the artisanal approach to his clothes rather than using craft as an embellishment. In comparison to other luxury brands in the mall, we had no budget and 45 days for execution. We found the contrast of using the ordinary trade of welders in a high-end luxury environment subversive, and used them like Rajesh uses tailors to create art. They hand-welded 12,000 scissors, which were sourced from Meerut, and composed them using the central pivot of the scissor in 12 different patterns, which then got assembled off-site and inserted into this frame in a white painted shell. All the services and electricals ran outside of this. The clothes were framed by this lattice. The imperfections of the welding seen on the image on the right adds tactility to the space rather than taking away from it. It was very successful in delivering a store that met the budget and time constraints, and most importantly, delivered the brand proposition effectively by using a frugal, handmade approach. We scaled this understanding to a different level when we had the privilege of working with a hotel that slowly spread its reach across various regions, giving us a chance to learn, experiment, and interpret an approach of local and regional luxury in different ways. Our first project was in the walled city of Jodhpur on a 6,000 square meter plot with 3 derelict 17th century buildings on it. The access to the plot was through these narrow lanes to this old gate to reveal this spectacular view. This was our first architectural project for the studio, and we were thrilled and shit scared. These 17th century buildings had 6 families living in them who had modified them crudely over time and had no semblance of the history of the architecture of the time they were built in. Our site plan looked at restoring these 3 buildings as anchors and creating shared spaces within them, such as the restaurant, pool, and spa, and then build the rooms around them as 3 new buildings, which would retain the relationship of the old buildings and the fort and the courtyard in the middle. The first block became the second gateway to the site after the old gate, and the rear 2 blocks become the canvas for the 3 old buildings in the foreground, which then metaphorically connect to the fort. We identified what could be removed from the building: layers of paint, new interventions of brick and mortar, till the jewel-like form of these buildings got revealed and they started connecting their shared history with the fort. The second part, more difficult, was designing the new blocks in a contemporary idiom, a lot more challenging. These buildings were west-facing because of the views to the fort, and hence were designed as double-skin structures, like the traditional Jharoka structures of the region. We began by referencing traditional patterns of the existing buildings on site. We needed the balcony skin to be openable because it faced the fort, and we needed the stone to be only 20 millimeters thick, to be light enough to move, to open up. To cut these patterns in that thickness could only be done through a CNC cutting process because the stone carvers needed a much thicker stone to be able to cut the patterns we wanted by hand. The CNC process, by the way, even at that stage, would have worked out slightly cheaper and quicker than what we chose to do. However, the client and us had a conversation and wanted to be authentic to the process and work with craftspeople, and chose instead to change the pattern so that it could be cut by hand on that thickness and stay authentic to the process. We could still retain the idea of the handmade, and this worked out even better than we'd imagined it, as it gave us the elevation you see on the image on the right, where the skin then becomes openable, and in contrast to the old buildings. This becomes parts of the balconies, the circulation spaces, negotiating privacy and transparency, and imbues the new buildings with a life of their own through changing light and shadow cast by the sharp desert sun. The most challenging bit was detailing the openable stone balcony shutter, 420 kilos of stone that needed to be moved at 600 rupees a square foot of budget. Developed again locally with welders and basic hardware to create a building with a dynamic facade, which guests change through the day and evening, and at night, the buildings become lanterns marking the corners of the site. To breathe life into the machine-cut stone through texture, we turned to the karigars for help, with patterns that they generated at site and not something we did on our drawing boards. Something that was translated as the organic tactile texture on the 50 mm thick solid stone, 10-foot high partition walls that divide the bathroom from the room at 200 rupees a square foot. As the solid stone perforated headboard of the bed, which serves as a lamp. All of this created a dialogue between the old and the new, not all planned, a lot of serendipity, and a seamless experience of the past and the present. It's only, that was a learning we had, that when we had our ears to the ground and engaged with people from the region and materials of the region, that we discovered what the true potential of the site and the process offered. And this brings me to a series of values that I'm going to talk about that we've, I think, rationalized over the past few years. One of these is we realize that you can only do that when you view the people you work with not as a means to achieve your vision, but as contributors to the process, to your own learning. This is something that has become a cornerstone for the studio, where we attempt to harness the genius of all the people we work with rather than focus on becoming directors or individual authors for any project. The other thing we learned, again much later when we started doing embodied energy studies of our old projects, was that the same jali, when it is handmade, is about 1/5 to 1/6 the embodied energy of a CNC machine-cut jali. In addition, you get the socio-cultural impact it has on reinvigorating traditional skill, a more tactile outcome, which only the handmade can give, of course, at the same cost nearly of the machine-made, something you can still only do in a country like ours. I would like to delve a little bit deeper on this idea of identity here. It's a question I get asked quite a lot, and I'm sure people discuss it, and leave us with some questions, maybe not answers, to ponder on. A lot of people say we need to be more Indian in our design approach as a community. But what is Indian? Is it a geopolitical notion based on the borders that define India as a country? Do we often get lost in the optics of nationalism and nostalgia rather than focusing on the inherent value of being local? What is more Indian in that context? A polyester kurta or a khadi t-shirt? I'd like to move on to the next project where, with the same hotel chain, we had an opportunity to work on a project in a totally different context for the same brand, with spectacular views of the Dhauladhars in Dharamshala, and on the south, the Tea Valley. While the architecture here takes a totally different form to Jodhpur, it celebrates the same values as contemporizing the vernacular process. The building itself straddles a ridge, and we use the contours of the hill to create a single 220-meter-long building which allows water to flow through on either side. The red spines that you see here are the individual staircases leading to the rooms in the yellow band on the top and the one below the blue band at ground level, which has all the public amenities. This way, the rooms have private access, have no corridors on either side, and enjoy uninterrupted views with balconies which are both mountain-facing and valley-facing, while being totally private from each other. The building is inspired in form by the powerful yet silent rhythm of a Buddhist monastery, and the materiality is derived from the local village homes and temples of the region. We used waste slate from local mines, and masons from Rajasthan honed their skills with local Himachali masons who are a bit lazier, and we had a bigger building to build. And together they created these thick masonry walls that gave the building both the form and the thermal mass for radiant heating. And this timeless expression, of course, that captures the rhythm and materiality we sought to express to begin with. The south elevation of the building, with the roof entirely provisioned with solar panels for the underfloor radiant heating and hot water supply, and the way the building straddles the sloping hill and sits against the mountains. I think engaging with the site and the vernacular gives rise to our understanding of timelessness. It's been interesting for us to see that a lot of people who visit the site, even in its current form, are unsure how old the building is. I often get asked, are you restoring a 100-year-old building or is it new? Here's a little film to give you a sense of the scale of the building. I'll quickly move on to the third project for us that we finished a couple of years ago in a different context between Jodhpur and Jaipur. In an 800-acre rewilded forest, in a bioreserve with a rainwater check dam on a private estate, where the family used to run a 12-tented property on the dam, which was seasonal, given the extremes of temperature. Business was unviable, and Ras entered into a JV with the family to convert it into a perennial property. The simple curvilinear plan on the dam created 16 pods in a line with a restaurant at the right end and upped the room count, which made the business plan viable. We had only 11 months to design and build the project and created a building that's almost as light as the tents due to the fragile nature of the dam built with lime and stone. And we used almost no concrete. The section takes our learning from Kangra, and the circulation is sunken on the forest side, which is the west side, which gives guests uninterrupted private views and balconies towards either side, the lake facing sunrise and the forest facing sunsets. There's a very light foundation system, precast hewn pipes filled with stone and lime, which give the structure stability, and over which sits an engineered metal structure, which elevated off the ground to run all the services under the slab without digging the topsoil. The foundations are designed in a manner that if we were ever to disassemble the building, they could just be pulled out. So that's the building at the end of month 5 of starting construction. The sunken path to approach the rooms, you move up, you enter the tent, and the lake gets revealed, taking forward the idea of unfolding thresholds from the Ras narrative. We wanted to reinvent the tradition of block printing of the region and worked with the super talented Dhwani Behel, a RISD-trained printmaker who went to site and took inspiration from the flora and fauna of the region, interpreted them in these very large hand-carved wooden blocks, which are 6 to 8 feet tall. The linen was not only block printed in a studio, but also hand-embroidered with migratory birds and animals that come to site. Each tent has a different theme, which then gets woven in. The same narratives goes into the furniture, whether it's the cases for the air conditioning units or the custom-designed camp-style furniture in Kikar wood. And how all these come together to form happy surprises, compositions of the narrative. A view looking towards the forest where you enter from. You can see there's a skylight that frames the brilliant night sky, and in winter lets the sun in over the bed. And that's when you begin to look towards the lake. You step out onto a private garden, and as you move onto the lake in a boat, you see the building lightly perched on the dam. And towards the right, you see the common area, which is also the reception bar and restaurant, which we took the narrative of the traditional pavilions of the region, reinterpreted it in dry construction, again without any concrete. It has a wraparound veranda on all 4 sides, with a pool on the west side, on the sunken side of the dam, which cascades down into a bauli that was revived. The construction system is all chitar sandstone clamped onto metal, and where people touch the surface, it has a hand-chiseled texture. The air conditioning grills were hand-cut at site. This is how the building sits on the dam. The veranda that connects you to the lake, the courtyard between the baradari and the tents. The interior again borrows on the same vocabulary, the same drawings that Dhwani had developed for the textiles, which was interpreted on the stone, and the image on the right shows you how it's used, which also gets translated into this hand-carved bar with migratory flamingos that visit Chhatrasagar in the winter. The sundowner veranda overlooking the forest. The kitchen block made of reclaimed stone that we got from the site as we dug the foundations of the old tents. The bauli that Akshay created around an old Devi temple that existed at site, which we retained, of course. Together with the owners, we found a way to keep the women from the neighboring villages actively engaged in the upkeep of the hotel through lipai, with cow dung and rangolis in Chuna being an integral part of the decor, including the hand-painted numbering on the rooms that are redone every couple of months. There's a video capturing the experience of being at site. I'm going to move on to a totally different context of the Himalayas and Uttarakhand, where we're working on a 100-acre site, a master plan, and architecture for a few buildings. It's the passion project of a client who loves the hills and wants to develop an eco-conscious community. The biggest problem in the hills, which most of you would know, is the impact of increasingly torrential rain and rampant unplanned construction, which causes a lot of damage, erosion, landslides. And in spite of that, ironically, there's no water for consumption. We worked with Akshay to create a master plan on how to first map a water and forest management strategy, and then only around that developed our road networks and the location for the houses and a hotel, an ecology-first approach, which got translated in the manner in which the roads were cut and retained with minimal cut and fill and small retaining walls of dry stone. We used hydroseeding, bamboo crib walls, brush layering, all of which are bioengineering methods of stabilizing the hillside. For water retention and management, there are about 300 check dams of dry stone which have been created across the swales on the site over a period of 3 years alone. These have not only got water to the site, but have regenerated the wells for the villages downstream. Because all the water has percolated into the hill, it's begun to revive the entire ecosystem of underground aquifers over time, a remarkable transformation. The houses themselves are collection points for rainwater. The water that's collected from the roof of one home gets used by the home downstream through a gravity-fed network. The wastewater, too, of course, gets harnessed, recycled, and used for irrigation. The other thing we try to do is build in areas which are not suitable for farming or planting or forest. Virtually impossible to build in traditional methods of construction. With Manju, we developed a construction technique where we could almost retain all the trees with no cut and fill, not altering the slope of the hill. We chose a construction methodology where we didn't need cranes or heavy machinery, and hence ensured that each surrounding tree did not get damaged, as the foundations are really localized. The scale model of this very strong basket-like weave of only 100 millimeter thick steel pipes create a superstructure where each module is less than 100 kgs, enabling a group of 4 workers to move up and down the building as it's being constructed. The building stills off the house off the ground, allowing rainwater to flow right through. Thereafter, a multi-layered dry construction system with almost no concrete creates a highly insulated shell, minimizing energy consumption. The structure came up very quickly, and as you can see, the trees around are all intact. Timber and slate at the facade rain screens. You can see the weave of the lightweight metal structure expressed on the outside and the inside of the house, expressing its construction as the walls weave through, hand-carved details that welcome you into the house. The outside and the inside connected strongly, both in terms of the way the house connects with the courtyards and the way the balconies perch out into the trees. The house encapsulated within the trees, as it disappears within the forest, which was the primary intent. I'm going to move to a totally different context of an interior we did for a restaurant and bar in Dubai. It was a Nouvelle Indian cuisine restaurant, and the brand wanted to move away from the cliche of India, you know, the traditional thali, the turbaned waiters, to something more vibrant and fun and colorful. So what do we do here? We had a dialogue with the client, enrolled them to start using craft to build this narrative, bring it alive in an authentic expression beyond just imagery. We used stone inlay techniques in collaboration with Mangrove Collective for tables in different zones. Some of these inlaid as board games in the lounge, lights developed by Ayush Kasliwal and how these sit within the space, specially developed jute weaves for the chairs, brass etching techniques, stone inlays in the floor. On the left is brass millwork we developed with a metal artisan in Vasant Kunj, and on the right, stained glass work done by Ayush Kasliwal, and how all of this comes alive in the space. You begin to see this vibrant space that belongs to Dubai, but brought to life using craft and the handmade, allowing us to weave in process over mere imagery. And even more exciting, because we could use it outside of a historical narrative. The last project I want to share is one where these values are slightly more explicit and evident in the way they come alive, where we had the opportunity to design offices for the State Department of Agriculture, being an enlightened government, included a farmers' learning center. This is in Orissa. We suggested opening up this facility to the citizens of Bhubaneswar because the building is in a beautiful secretariat area in the heart of the city. We did so by lifting all the offices up and freeing up the ground plane to create a free-flowing space at the level of the stilt. The top 3 floors that you see here are the offices. The lower floor, the stilted floor, is a ground plane that opens up to the street and shares amenities that were created for the building, such as the library, auditoriums, the gallery, cafeteria, and the gardens, of course, with the city. This is then used for events, for workshops, for huts, and for people to wander through. The offices close at 5 p.m., but the building stays open till 10. Again, while the architecture of the building is visually striking, one of the things I want to spend a little time on is the idea of adaptive thermal comfort and how we've understood it, an area close to my heart and one we're actively working on. We want to move away from this idea of saying there should be a one benchmark for comfort. Many of us debate if the most comfortable temperature is 22 degrees or 27. The question is for whom and in what conditions. If you see these 2 people here, one in Ladakh, one in Kerala, what do you think is a common temperature of thermal comfort for them? Clearly, you begin to understand that when you're building and who you're building for, you need to address the past and present context. When we dress appropriately and are in tune with our bodies and the outdoors, our body is comfortable with lesser variations in temperature between outdoors and indoors. For Bhubaneswar, we found this temperature to be about 29 degrees centigrade in the shade, with a slow-moving fan creating a speed of about 1 meters per second hitting our skin. We were able to design a night purging cooling system for the building, for 85% of the building. There's a drop of 12 degrees between morning and evening temperatures in the peak of summer, and the cool night air becomes our cooling device. The building is built in a courtyard typology, and 85% of the building, like I said, is non-air conditioned. It has a high thermal mass. So at night, when the office is shut and the temperatures fall, the cool air is drawn into the building through the ducts on the north elevation. It gets stored, the cool gets stored into the walls and furniture and partitions, and gets sucked out through the courtyard and through the solar chimneys on the other side. In the day, once the temperatures rise, vents close, fans come on, and cool gets exchanged between the floors, ceiling, and the partition walls like a giant cooler. We've been able to achieve really comfortable temperatures, even in peak temperatures of 38, 39, to bring the building down to our targets, which meet the IMAX standards. The building meets an EPI of about 31 kilowatt hours per meter square per year, well within the Griha building targets for office buildings in 2030. These are the corridors, which are naturally ventilated, shaded, and the building with its courtyard. The building, of course, has a strong identity derived from the ikat weaves of the region. We used 4 colors of brick representing the different soil of the state, being an agricultural office, as louvers which shade the glazing and give identity to the building. It creates a contemporary expression that celebrates that region, moving away from the universal aspiration for this through minimalism or steel and glass. We convinced the government to give patronage to a body of regional skills and crafts at an architectural scale which they'd never worked on. It was interesting for us to find out that what most artisans are farmers who work as artisans in non-farming seasons now because there's just not enough work. We were very fortunate to find Sibanand Bhol, an architect from Bhubaneswar and who runs a studio called Collective Craft. We set the brief, created the canvas, and then left it to him and the craftspeople to own the process. It really took a while for us to let go of our control and trust the process. We would go in every couple of months, have a conversation, and then we had to kind of step back to allow for things to emerge. And it was all happening on in situ, so there was no room, for error and for kind of redoing things. He created narratives around mythology, around agriculture, all related to the theme of the land and something that would be familiar to the locals. These are condylite lotuses that are cast into the slabs, the way our service shafts are screened with narratives of temple flowers. Dead walls are carved at sight with paddy and other crop. The metalwork of that region used as screens and lighting devices. The way the signage and the main gates are done. And the building sits in context of the land. I'm going to leave you with a video where Sibanand and the craftspeople speak of the experience they had.
We were quite excited, with the quantum of work that could be generated if artisans, if craft and architecture could come together. And I think that has been a big achievement, that this building project could generate work for about 50 artisans for a continuous 6 months. And we actually got, artisans who had stopped working with the traditional skills. We convinced them to come back and to start working again.
काम करुले से निर्दिष्ट गोटे ही कम भितर रही चिंताधारा से गोटे भितर रही निर्दिष्ट मूर्ति बनवारे चिंताधारा से भितर सीमित थिला जार फल यही कमटा कृषि भवन काम कर आम मानक देखागला से प्रकृत में आम कलाटा को केमितिका अन्य दृष्टि भी देखिपर
It's a perfect setting for us where we could bring in artisans and craft. If you talk of farmers and if you talk about people coming from villages to this building, then we want to show them something that's familiar to their environment, and that is where craft comes in.
Thank you.